Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It's Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony in New York.
And I'm Luci Liebfried in Chicago. Are you ready for another Paranormal Friday night? Thank you all for joining us tonight. We welcome all of our regular listeners and those of you who have tuned in for the very first time. If you have a question for our guest tonight or about the topic tonight, feel free to ask us in the chat room or call into the show at 661-244-9831. Please press the number 1 so that we know that you want to speak to us. Don't forget, you can always send us an email with future topics that you'd like to see on the show, or maybe you have a story or a theory that you want to share with us on air. Our email address is paranormal.review@aol.com. We also have our own YouTube channel where you can watch all of our previous shows. Don't forget to check out our Facebook show page for more information on the paranormal and upcoming shows.
Well, Lucy and I are back from St. Albans Sanitarium, and typically what we've normally done in the past is usually the week after our investigation. We normally will do an evidence reveal show, but circumstances were not behind us, and we have to push it, I think, a couple of weeks we're going to do it? Not next week, the week after?
Yeah, we're going to do it in 2 weeks, the week after.
Okay. So look for that show in a couple of weeks. We'll go over our evidence, the night that we had. We'll go over what happened during the live show and then what actually happened after we ended the show and continued the night. We were there till about, 3:30, 4 a.m.?
3:30 in the morning.
3:30 in the morning. It was a long night. It was an interesting night, and I think I'm going to leave it at that. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So this should come as no surprise. Despite our reputation as a science-minded superpower, America has always had a predilection for the unseen. It has ebbed and flowed with us for as long as this nation has existed, in the form of the 18th century pilgrim mystics, the domesticated poltergeist that knocked on command in the 19th century, and even in the academically inclined parapsychologist of the 20th century. Whether you believe in these ideas or not is almost immaterial. The paranormal is an inescapable ingredient in the American identity that has shaped and been shaped by our society for centuries. Tonight's show is a follow-up to our previous shows on religion and paranormal, and Lucy and I will try and add more debatable topics and possibly answer some of your questions. But we won't be doing this alone tonight. Noah Tysick is a professor, author, master fine art photographer, and a former guest blogger, translator for the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. In addition to his academic training, he studied spiritualism at Milwaukee's historic Morris Pratt Institute and Kadampa Buddhism under the Venerable Geshe Kelsang Gyatso in Chicago. I think I just butchered that, Lucy. Tonight's discussion will be educational and not meant to convince, sway, or brainwash our listeners. You know, Aristotle once said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." Please help me in welcoming back to the show our dear friend and one of the most intellectual minds on religion and the paranormal, Professor Noah Tysick. Hi, Noah. So glad to have you on tonight.
Hi, Lucy and Anthony. Thank you so much for having me back.
Hi, Noah. Welcome back to the show. You know, we always have such a great discussion when you're with us. I guess my first question would be about your entrance to the religious and paranormal world. Why have you become so interested in spiritualism and faith-based religions as well as the paranormal?
That's a very good question, Lucy. You know, my upbringing, with the religious upbringing, my parents, they weren't, religious fanatics, but, we were very spiritual, and I was raised with a foundation. In our family, we've kind of moved beyond that. But when I went to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I changed my mind a million times. Even in grad school, I changed my mind. And what I found out was I don't want to devote my life to, I have a degree in literature. I don't want to spend my whole life reading books by dead people. I would rather study things that go kind of beyond that. And so that led to my own personal quest to look at as many world religions as possible. And not to indoctrinate myself, but I wanted to know how other cultures interpreted different things that we all experience. Because what I found is that it's really hard to take things that are more esoteric or transcendental or paranormal and to actually put it into words. It almost seems, I don't know, it's like videotaping the birth of a child. It's something that not everyone should look at. It felt kind of, it feels weird to read about it and write about it. And so what I found in reading some of the Christian mystics is that they had a really hard time expressing their experiences. And I found the same with Buddhism, Hinduism, voodoo, all these other things. And so I think it became more of a personal, for lack of a better word, obsession. And it's actually a hobby at the same time, for lack of a better word, too, that I try to understand things that I've personally experienced and try to make sense of it within the context of, my own intellectual mind, as well as within the context of my upbringing, and within the context of how other cultures and religions and parapsychologists have interpreted the same things. And I never am disappointed to hear how other people interpret things or how they explain things. And I think it's important, as you guys mentioned at the outset, that all of us try to keep an open mind. And that doesn't mean abandoning your beliefs if you're religious or if you're not. That's irrelevant, or spiritual or not. It's important, I think, that we look at our experience and then be willing to hear other people try to articulate that same thing. And in turn, we can learn a lot of things. And so now that I'm 40, I've had, pretty much 20-plus years of serious looking into different phenomena and looking into belief systems and trying to find out what's BS and what I find to be true personally. But in no way do I ever push that on other people, because I like to hear how they interpret it. And I'm long-winded, as you know, but it reminds me of one of the Hindu mystics. The way they explain ultimate reality or God or whatever you want to call that force, they explain it in a way that I find very eloquent. A mother has 3 children. She sends them each into the woods one at a time to look for a chameleon and asks them to come back and explain what they had seen. And each one of them had seen, the same thing. A chameleon, we know, basically a lizard-type animal. It climbs up trees and all that stuff. But they all had a different version. One saw it as frightening, one saw it as beautiful, and one saw it as mystical. But there was no wrong answer. It was just a matter of how they perceived it. And I think that religion is the same way, especially when you transpose that over paranormal phenomena.
Well, you know what? I do need to get this topic out of the way because it's become so prevalent on everyone's minds lately. So in light of all the recent news, it seems to me that much of the world's conflicts they revolve around religion and the mandates that they profess onto others. You know, we have the Iraq conflict, Islam extremists that make up many terrorist groups, and then the ever-continuing Israel-Palestine conflict, which has come to a boil this week. We even have the infamous Hobby Lobby American court case. Now, just for the sake of argument, and this may not have anything to do with the paranormal, just for argument's sake, would the world be more at peace if religion did not exist?
That is the 1,000-pound question, and that's something that I think those of us that are always looking for truth or looking beyond ourselves, whether it be paranormal or religious, because I think there's a big overlap there, and I'd like to put that there at the outset. And when I say religious, I don't mean an organized religion, but a belief in something bigger than ourselves. I think that religion is frightening. If you think of it this way, if you love somebody really deep, then you hurt really deep. And what happens is people, they tend to, they personalize their religion. They're taught that their way is the only way, and they feel that if you disagree with the religion, then that's an assault on them. And this is primarily the result of Abrahamic religions, all the big three. We've got Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Those three all have the same saying: there is no God but Jehovah, there is no God but Allah, there is no God but Yadhe-Vadhe in Judaism, or they would say G-D. And those three are the ones where you're going to notice the most conflict. And the Gaza Strip conflict it's reason for alarm. But you're not going to wipe out people's beliefs. They're going to be there. But on the other side, we have other religions. We have things like Hinduism, which is, other than what we now call voodoo, Hinduism is the oldest religion. And it was actually called the Sanatana Dharma. It was, the teachings of the ancient ones. In Hinduism, they believe that divinity has multiple faces, endless manifestations. So there's no conflict there. That's why when the British Empire tried to overtake India, Gandhi brought them down by just refusing to eat. They didn't have to lift a finger. There was nothing to fight over. The same thing with Buddhism. And there are extremist groups within Buddhism, and Buddhism is a broad term. But generally speaking, Buddhism doesn't focus so much on God. They focus more on the mind and taking care of yourself and taking care of others. And so there's no struggle there. So the Eastern religions are a lot less volatile, but it's those three Abrahamic religions that cause so much trouble. And I wish I was a theologian or a saint where I could tell you, it would be better to not have religion. But at the same time, I'm not sure if that's the answer, because we can look at it from a very non-sectarian, non-religious point of view and basically say, even without religion, people have egos, and those egos get in the way. They want to be right. And if I were to boil down what all religions teach, is the need to be right rather than doing the right thing is probably the biggest source of conflict of any war, anything you've seen on the planet. And I don't mean to oversimplify, but I mean that's what I found.
Mhm. It's just, even though there's a different beliefs, it just seems like that one factor is the insistence that I'm right and you need to believe this. That's not so much the religion itself, but it's that need to make someone else believe what you believe.
And that's terrifying, because at the same time, just about 2 hours before I logged onto the show, I saw that in China, a river just turned blood red. And what happens is, if you read, in Catholicism, they call it the Apocalypse, or in Protestantism, they call it Revelation, it looks like all of the signs of the quote-unquote end of days are coming, and this whole war in Israel and Palestine, they actually see it as a good thing, that it's actually ushering in a new era, the return of Jesus. And Judaism, some of them see it as regaining their land, and that makes room for the Messiah, whoever that is. In Islam, especially the more radical factions, they see it as, at minimum, a fatwa. If not a fatwa, they see it as jihad on a very large scale. So in addition to being right, there's a payoff for this, because everybody's, in these three groups in particular, they're looking at the great beyond, rather than thinking about we have a planet that we don't want to destroy and literally scorch the atmosphere in the ozone layer, which could happen. And they're looking more at the afterlife, which none of us knows exactly, I don't think, what's going to happen. And that's what frightens me.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, now that I've angered half the audience, let's get into some of the areas for tonight's show. During my research, I came across many different kinds of anomalous experiences, and I actually found a list. Now, paranormal and religious experiences were both on this list. The religious experiences, they tend to be given a great deal more respect than the paranormal experiences, but paranormal experiences seem to be dismissed more easily. Why do you feel that one is regarded more than the other?
I love it. That, in my experience, people that enjoy the paranormal, we're fine as long as we're around like-minded people. Outsiders look at us as kooks that we're just, looking for things that go bump in the night, which is, I find rich, considering when you think about religion, just because it's older and a bit more structured and there's a hierarchy, it tends to have automatic respect, because there is the perception of, and I don't want to get too much into this, the perception of holiness and piety and being in line with some divine plan, whereas people that look at the paranormal, we're just playing in the dark with, ghosts and childhood fantasies. At worst, we're considered necromancers. At best, we're considered kooks. Whereas in religion, basically the only foothold that they have is time. Because if you look, and I'm not criticizing anyone's religion, I'm just using examples that come to mind. If you look at Catholicism, Catholicism enjoyed keeping people illiterate for as long as they could. Rather than allowing people to read the Bible for themselves and make decisions for themselves, they developed the liturgy and the Mass, and they were spoon-fed portions of the Bible that suited the church's needs. At the same time, they created stained glass windows and statues so people could look at pictures and glean from that. And then before the rosary, the actual, beads with the cross was developed, people were taught, just rote memory, the Hail Mary prayer, and they counted it out on knots or pebbles. And so what I think has happened, people didn't feel like they could examine things for themselves because they were repressed as far as knowledge and education goes. They were dependent on so-called religious figures to tell them what to think, and they accepted it. And if they didn't, there were dire consequences. We know about the Spanish Inquisition. Even in countries where Islam is the most predominant and they're ruled by Sharia law rather than by some sort of other system, be it democracy or communism or whatever, the religious leaders have the power over thought. And so what I think has happened in the last probably 200 years is we're allowed to think for ourselves. And when I say we, I'm talking white men. Women, people of color, other nationalities, they've had a lot less time. And now that we have time to think for ourselves, people want to dismiss it because it's not a quote-unquote established institution. We are actually, we're amateurs, we're kooks. Does that make sense? I mean, we've been kept in the dark for so long, and religions have had power for far too long that the credibility is pretty much carried over throughout millennia, if you want to think about it, because we've had more education in the past 50 years than throughout the entire collective history of humanity. And religion has been a big suppressor of that, unfortunately.
No, I agree.
I agree, but I think slowly, it's changing now because, for one main reason, I think it's because of technology. It's the instant gratification, that many of, especially the young kids now that are growing up, the instant gratification. They need to find an answer, and they need to find it on their own right away. And I think religious studies or theologian studies itself tends to be, I think, from what I've gathered, experiencing from family and friends and so on and so forth, that the idea of words written in a book 2,000 years ago is, I think, being more dismissed now because people tend to want to try and find the proof, trying to prove to themselves what is out there. And I think they can't necessarily prove what's within the Bible, because obviously they can't go back to that time, and none of which can exist in this time frame. So the paranormal is their source. And I think what is happening now, and I'm feeling could happen in the distant future, is a sort of morphing of religion and creating even like the science and the paranormal and religious and spiritual or anything like that, any of those natures, morphed into something that could be completely different than what we're living in the world today. I don't know if you agree.
I do agree, Anthony. I think that I would like to see that. I would like to see much more of a marriage. And kind of speaking on a previous point, it's interesting because if you read the ancient Vedas in Hinduism, or you read the ancient, when I say ancient, I'm talking at least 7,000 years old in Hinduism, at least 5,000 in Buddhism. Buddhism, if you read like the sutras, the things that they knew, that they experienced themselves in meditation or by experience, it's constantly proven by science. Whereas in the Abrahamic religions, those strictly remain faith-based. But I agree with you. I think there is a shift. It's almost like when you see on the news and they show radical groups, they're screaming to their death because we just don't buy it anymore. And it's not to say that religion's bad per se, but we know that we can do better. Because if it's doing more harm than good, to Luci's point, such as in the Middle East and everywhere else, then we need to reconsider it. And I'll use an example. You talk about experience. Most of us, except for the goody two-shoes out there, and I love you, I'm not being mean, our parents told us, don't drink alcohol, you'll get a hangover, you'll puke, you'll get sick. No matter how many warnings we get, we do not understand the gravity of drinking alcohol until we spend a night over the porcelain god, puking our guts out, and begging for mercy, and negotiating and saying, I'll never do it again if this just stops.
Right.
And I think that is the best, for me, the best analogy because, it's experience. And I think as humans, what I think is we're going more on experience. Another issue relevant to that, and I don't want to be too political and reel me back in, but when it comes to gay marriage, people, they're like, well, my religion says that's evil, it's against quote unquote God's word. But people are saying, but my cousin's gay, my uncle's gay, and if God was a good God, why would he or she make them burn forever in a hell just because of who they loved? So there's a common sense. I think we're moving toward a new age of enlightenment. And with paranormal investigations, just like science, it's a lot of people call it pseudoscience, but there are certain things that people can't deny. If the data is there, the data is there. If you have the EVP, if you have the video footage, there's legitimate fact, is a lot more tangible than a lot of religious things that you see on TV. If somebody says, the bread became the literal body of Jesus, that's all faith-based. So I think there's a melding of science, religion, and the paranormal that I would like to see, and that I'm hopeful that the world is going to move toward.
I think also, too, I personally think that a person to have faith in their religion, a belief in their religion, whatever it is, and I'm just going to talk about, I can only talk about, Christianity. That's the way that I've been indoctrinated. That's the way that I've been brought up, and that's what I've been taught. And so, growing up, I've never really, and I probably am in the 75% percentile statistics of everyone out there in the world, that I've never really read the Bible. I've never really gone, from cover to cover. Truly, I've gone to Sunday school. I've gone to Catholic school, and I've been taught and have been lectured by priests and by my teachers about things within the Bible. But myself, I've never read through it all. And I don't know if you've heard recent shows, and I've talked to Luci about this. I've been doing a lot of research, a lot of inner truth-seeking. And there are things that I'm learning now that I have never learned about the Bible before, and some of which are atrocious. And the idea, and going back to what you were just saying, in the Bible, homosexuality is deemed as a sin or whatever you want to call it. There are so many other things in that same Bible that, one, people continually do every single day but don't even know that they're doing it, and it's a sin. And two, there are things that have been deemed by God, and I'll take, for example, slavery. Slavery has been, I guess, I can't even think of the word right now, but slavery has been put out by God and has been told to its followers that slavery is good, that slavery is something that we must adhere to. And the Bible even goes into detail about what to do to your slaves and how they should act and how and when you should kill your slave. Those things I've never learned before. And I'm starting to learn those now, and I'm starting to try and make sense of it as an adult, trying to make sense of that. But also, too, I'm heavily within the paranormal. And so I'm at a crossroads right now, is trying to figure out which direction I'm going to go in. And I think it's a good thing for me. I think I've always tried to seek out the truth in everything, and this is just another form of it. It's just now it's become so personal, and it's hitting something that has been with me for 40 years. So it's a weird time right now, but I think if you believe in your faith, I think whatever the holy book that you have, or whatever the writings that you have, read them and learn about them, because why should you continue your life learning from others but not really understanding what it is that you're believing in and whether or not you want to believe in that and you want to continue that? Maybe the paranormal is something that you can learn about and not think people are kooks for dealing that. I think people who are outside of my religion think I'm a kook because I believe in Christianity. It's just, I'm at a weird state right now, Noah, so I may be rambling, but it's just, it's very enlightening. It's a very enlightening point for me right now, learning about what I am learning about within my religion, and also learning about what I have been experiencing and learning about within the paranormal.
And that's a good place to be, and you're not babbling at all, Anthony. What I think we all come to that point where the rubber hits the road. I don't mean to speak in cliche, but yeah, like with Catholicism, what a lot of Protestants don't do is they don't give Catholics the credit for this canon of books that we call the Bible. What they don't realize is how the Bible was actually assembled. They don't know that it was a meeting of a bunch of white men
And the only reason Revelation, the apocalypse, the thing that scares people the most, is only in the Bible because of a margin of one vote. It was a voting process. What they don't realize is that there are a lot of other, and I was talking to my good friend Ann Reich out in California, she won't mind me saying her name, that there are so many Gospels, but only 4 were chosen. I mean,
right.
There's arguably anywhere between 25 and 50. The most authentic, ironically, is the Gospel of St. Thomas. And that, her name is Elaine Pagels, and I believe she is a theologian that teaches at Yale Divinity School. Her interpretation of that and her commentary at the end is wonderful. And the reason that seems to be the most authentic is for a couple of reasons. One, it's written in the native tongue of what would have been spoken by the historical Jesus. It was directly in Aramaic, spoken in Palestine at that time. Secondly, the Gospel of St. Thomas is not a story or a narrative. It's a collection of sayings, which is consistent with other more ancient religious writings. But that's been suppressed because there's specifically one segment in there, and I'm paraphrasing, pretty much abolishes the need for churches. It says, split a piece of wood, I'm there, split a rock, you'll find me there.
Right.
Saying that you don't need an institution, you can find it on your own. And so I think that those of us that look at the paranormal, we're looking not just for ghosts and necessarily spooky things. We are asking the big questions, the good questions, the ones that matter, the things that are part of the branch of philosophy of 4 branches. Metaphysics is the big one with the big questions. And even if people don't know the language, I study metaphysics, that doesn't matter. What we do is we have an experience, like you and Lucy had your last investigation, and what you guys experience, and you can't transfer that to other people. They have to experience it themselves. And so reading from books like the Bible or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or whatever sacred text is just one reference point, and we should be very careful about clinging to that, because that is just one person's interpretation that by popular vote, literally and metaphorically, has been passed down. Because we can glean from that and take the things that apply to what we can confirm ourselves and make it work. But I think that we're in a society that we want a package deal. You're Democrat or you're Republican. If you're Republican,
labels.
Then you have to, you have to be pro-life. You have to be this. You have to be this. If you're a Democrat, you have to be this and this. No, we're not two-dimensional people, and American culture is really guilty of that. Even if you watch the evening news, they'll say, tune in at 6. We'll give you both sides of the story. And there's never two sides. There's a lot more. Life is more complex than that. And now I'm rambling, so I'm going to pause and let you guys hear me.
No, and that was one of the... Wait, just one thing I just wanted to point out. That was one of the reasons why we did the show on the Church of Satan. There's the religion, there's the non-believers, the believers, and then what I think in the world is the other sector, which is also the Church of Satan. And then you've got a whole other group of room full of people that believe in all different things. And that's the reason why we wanted to do that show on the Church of Satan, was just to give the world, or give our listeners, if they were willing to listen, the idea that it's not just black and white, that there are other things out there that, even if you don't consider to believe in, it's good to know what is out there, and it's good to know what's available to you, that if you ever so decided to question anything, that at least now here's another outlet that you can research and discover for yourself.
Well, see, I agree with that, with the questioning. I mean, where you're at right now, Anthony, I've been there for quite a long while. I was raised Catholic, but yet I have Native American roots. And a lot of the things that Native Americans believe as far as religion, as far as a higher power, even homosexuality, homosexuals in the Native American world are actually they're treated with respect. They are the person that walks two paths. Here we have, the religions the major religions that are teaching us that's bad, but yet for thousands of years, Native Americans have looked at it in a whole completely different light. What they believe as far as higher powers has always been different. Belief in the paranormal, it's part of what we believe. So acceptance of the paranormal, for me, has always been much easier. What I'm afraid of, we're talking about like acceptance and we're talking about awareness. That same repression that happened within the Catholic Church where, they didn't want the average person to know exactly what's going on. I'm afraid of that continuing, especially in terms of the paranormal.
Well, it leads into one of my questions that I had for you, Noah. I've read that there's many sociologists that argue that we live in a secular society. Religion seems to be going off-grid, but a rise in, and I was talking about this before, a rise in paranormal beliefs seem to be strengthening ever so slightly, not high, but ever so slightly. Do you feel that many people in today's world are demanding more proof for religious beliefs, like I was talking about before, and therefore put more focus on the paranormal investigating than religious studies, sort of, I guess, finding on their own, then they want to be able to experience it, and like I was saying before, not just read it in a book.
Bingo, exactly. In my college classrooms, when I teach Southern Gothic literature, and we talk about ghosts, and we talk about spells, and we talk about the afterlife and death rituals, and then I have a class this fall. I'm going to be teaching a literature class that focuses on Eastern religious sacred books as literature, not as gospel, but as literature. I have more students than not that come up to me and say, I was raised one way, but this happened to me. What do you think that means? That happens so often. And probably the best conversations, the best learning happens from that. They all have a story. And I'm not trying to plug a show. I have no horse in this race, but one show that I really enjoy watching is Celebrity Ghost Stories. The most unexpected people, they show up and they all have these stories. And I think that when each of us has an experience or several, we know, well, it doesn't fit in with what I've been taught about religion. But what they don't realize is a couple things. I'll give you a few examples. People say that talking to the dead is evil. You shouldn't do it.
Right.
Or if you're talking to the dead, you're talking to demons. But what they fail to recognize is that in two of the Gospels, if they consider themselves a Christian, Jesus himself was transfigured on the mountain, and he spoke with Moses and Elijah. He spoke with two dead people as witnessed by at least three, I believe, of his disciples. And that's not necromancy. If you adhere to Christianity and Jesus is your example, he spoke with the dead. Another example of that would be UFOs. People say, I read the most bizarre and disconcerting, which to most people won't be a shock. Ken Ham, the owner, operator, and pseudoscientist of the Creationist Museum in Kentucky, and some people may have seen his Bill Nye the Science Guy debate. They debated creation versus evolution. He came out this week as saying that NASA needs to quit looking for other life because they're damned to hell anyway. And his rationale is biblically based. I read it thoroughly, but it just doesn't jive with me. But at the same time, if you're a more thoughtful Christian and you look at, say, the book of Ezekiel is all about unidentified flying objects, and he identifies those as actually different forms of angels. He talks about, right. And for listeners that are interested, look at Ezekiel when he's by the river of Shabar. He talks about the wheel within a wheel, and it's so high that it was dreadful, and it's this green color. There's eyes all around, which in my mind, I picture lights all around. UFOs are throughout the Bible. They're throughout religious art. And so I think that people need to educate themselves and not just pick up the package and call it good, and not be a lazy thinker, but experience stuff and continue to question. But back to your point, in the classroom and even with my family, I see a lot of people, they all have things that they have questions, that they'll have experiences or questions that don't fit into that cozy little comfortable package called Christianity necessarily.
Well, just getting back to what you were talking about UFOs, just this week, I think it was, let me see if I can pull it up. I think it was on July 23rd. Yeah, July 23rd, just 2 days ago, on Examiner.com, there was a report, published report, that Pope Francis is currently, right now, preparing a major world statement about extraterrestrial life and its theological implications. And I guess he's sort of preparing because of all the news between NASA and all the scientists and all the studies, and who knows, maybe even the paranormal accounts that have been coming forward. It sort of irked a question to me. What announcement could the Pope make from a religious standpoint? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Noah. The Bible itself talks about this planet, and I have never heard of anything where God has created life anywhere else, or else I'm pretty sure I would have known about that, but maybe I'm wrong. So if the idea of life from outside of this planet were to enter here, wouldn't religion simply be just a childhood fairy tale at that point?
I'm glad you asked that, because when I read Ken Ham's kind of creepy logic, it made me think the same thing. Would that negate religious belief? I don't think so. I think that, again, it takes us back to using our experience and our upbringing as a reference point rather than a definite, rather than something static. I can imagine what the Pope would have to say would have this major shift in thinking, because if we were each to experience, ETs or unidentified flying objects, we would have our own impression. And I want to jump over a little bit to what Luci was saying about being Native American. We lost so much by overtaking this continent. We lost some very deep cultures that were oral, and when it's oral and passed down, if you try to annihilate that, you miss it. But when I've read Black Hawk, he probably one of the most spiritual and paranormally aware Native Americans that I've ever read. He talks about seeing things coming from the heavens. He talks about being in this atmosphere of spirituality where he can see the living and the dead. And he said something so poetic when he stepped into this zone. He was in the zone, whatever that was. He said, and when I breathed, my breath was lightning. And he successfully and accurately depicted several events that would happen when when Europeans came in and overtook this continent. And I think we've lost a lot of that because of our own mistakes, which is really sad. I'm way off topic, and I forgot where you were headed, so if you can help me out, that'd be great. But I had to bring up Black Hawk with what happened, because what he just his little bit of writing, because so much of that is oral, and we've lost it, and it's really unfortunate.
I just think, even believers and non-believers of the paranormal, I think in that moment when it is globally conscious that there is life out there, or that we have a UFO or UFOs, multiple, around our planet trying to communicate with us, I think at that point, for the non-believers and believers of the paranormal, regardless of faith, we'll start to question things. I think because there's been such a difference, or I guess a void between the paranormal and religions itself, that it has to be an either-or type of deal. It may not be true, but I think a lot of people have that mentality, and I think at that point when it comes to fruition that there is life and it is publicly announced and it is experienced by everyone, that I think they may question their religion to say, well, my religion never talked about that, and if there is life, well, then what does that mean about my God? What does that mean about what my faith is and what I've been believed and what I've been taught to believe in or to have faith in? Is there a God? Now, if there is life on another planet, is there a heaven? Is there such a thing as hell anymore? I think a majority of them, in my opinion, I think would start to question it, and therefore, I don't know if then religion would tend to exist anymore. There may be a religion where you believe in that faith, but I think the holy books, I think, may sort of be invisible at that point.
They could be, and I don't think that would be a bad thing, because
no,
I think that people are innately good. In my experience, you have to teach people to be cruel. I mean, people that, unless they're mentally ill or they've had a abusive childhood, people aren't innately cruel. And we're all here in the U.S. we're raised to believe that we're born sinful and we're bad, and that's really harmful from the outset. But if you think about other life that we aren't aware of, coming in and cohabitating with us and things like that, I think that raises a lot of good questions rather than negating the Bible or other religions. And just for a few examples, people tend to accept one interpretation of Scripture or another text as meaning one thing. But basically, in Christianity, Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions." And people think that means when you die, you're going to get either a P. Diddy mansion or a J-Lo mansion or a Justin Bieber. But what I think, my thought on that is, it means there's a lot of compartments to the universe that we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, the Buddha said the same thing. He said there are 1,000 Dharma doors. And Dharma is not just from the show Dharma and Greg, but Dharma is actually... It translates roughly as ultimate truth, so like the gospel. And what the historic Buddha Shakyamuni said was that there's 1,000 Dharma doors, meaning there's a lot that we don't know. And in fact, the historic Buddha even said, "I am not the answer." He said, "I'm the finger pointing at the answer." And then if we look at even Hinduism, in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, he says that there are endless forms, endless faces of reality that we'll never totally comprehend. It was unbearable for Arjuna, who was receiving this teaching, to even see it. And so I think that if we try to reframe these religious books within our own experience, we'll start to discover things that preachers or priests or gurus or whoever, they projected it on us, and we'll see it in a new light. And I think that's pretty liberating. And back to your point, Anthony, about doing your own research, rather than, I should say this, in addition to finding the inconsistencies, I think you're going to start to find things that you're like, you know what, they're half-assed right on this. Pardon my French. They're half right on this. What I found is this, and I think as a more thinking society, we're going to start to shift that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, this I read about it, and I can't remember exactly where the article was, but it was something along the lines of that Pope Francis was willing to baptize any extraterrestrials that came here. That led me to thinking, here we go again with thinking, I'm right. This is my way of thinking. is it possible that if there is life on a different planet, can't they possibly have their own belief in a higher power? Who are we to naturally assume that they come here and we're going to, same thing all over again, we're going to baptize you and you're no longer going to be a savage, you're going to be a Christian? I mean, what right do we have to do that?
Absolutely, and I'm smiling. You can't see it, of course, but I picture, Pope Francis, and I think he's a nice pope, bringing E.T. down into the water and baptizing him, but maybe E.T.,
right,
because he had the ability to get here. Obviously, he's much further along than our civilization. Who are we to impose that on him? I'm willing to baptize him. Well, don't do us any favors, because they can probably share some things with us that we'll never understand, or, it could take generations. But willing to baptize aliens, that's to me, that's funny, because I don't think that, you need someone to baptize you. And in fact, can I tell a story on the side?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Here in Michigan, I can't believe I'm going to tell this, but I'll tell it. We have the world's largest crucifix. It was created by a sculptor named Marshall Fredericks in Indian River. It's called the Cross in the Woods. Very beautiful shrine, very serene. It's literally in the woods. The indoor part of the church has a baptismal tank that you can baptize babies and bless yourself when you come in, and there's a waterfall that comes down, and it has steps. And out of my own, not that I felt like I needed forgiveness necessarily, but I thought, I felt moved in some way. I had some sacred experience when I was there about 10 years ago in the summer. So it was after visiting hours, and they keep the grounds open. I literally stripped down, walked into their tank, which they would have been horrified, butt naked before God and everybody, dipped myself in the water, came out the other side, shook off, put my clothes on and left. And I felt that was as legitimate as some priest coming in and doing it. In fact, more so because it was a personal choice, not, hey, you're this age, you need to be baptized. Mm-hmm. And so I think that private ritual and private revelation and private beliefs are going to become more of a mainstay because they're not as caustic, and then we don't have all these holy wars because people want to be right. It's like, no, you should wear a yarmulke. No, you should, wear this. That it's silly. It's just plain insane. And I think that there's a big awakening happening. Like Anthony said, I need to believe that, and in my experience, I see that. So we can get it. And I got off track. I'm sorry. Back to the host and the profession. Not to the naked runner up in the woods in Michigan.
I thought you were going to say something else, Noah, but I'm not going to mention it now. So getting back into the paranormal a little bit, I have a question that actually may anger some people. Those of us who are active in the paranormal field, meaning going out and investigating, all say the same thing. They're searching for the truth. I've said it all the time. I've heard so many other people. There's so many websites out there. We seek the truth. We seek the truth. But 95%, and I could be wrong on this because this is just something that from my research I've gathered. I haven't seen an actual legitimate statistic. But 95%, I think, of these people already believe in some sort of religion, some sort of theism. So if their religion already explains the afterlife, why do you think that they still need to search?
That is a wonderful question. And it brings, and I don't mean to anger people because I have the utmost respect, but I've watched everything about Lorraine Warren that I've been able to. And her answer to everything is, she always has a Catholic answer, in the name of Christ, go away. You have holy water, you need to do this. But at the same time, then you have other people on these other shows come in, and they may have a Native American come in. And you're right, when you have
when your mind is already made up, what are you looking for? If you found the truth, why search for it? And I think that people that are sincere and really want to find the truth, they'll find it. And that reminds me of something that Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, he's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, and he was a good friend of Dr. Martin Luther King, and also a strong force that kind of, he was a big impetus for the whole civil rights movement here in the U.S., and he's still alive. He said that we should never say, I found the truth, but instead I have found a truth. Because truth is relative. It is not, and to me that means a lot. Other people say, no, truth is truth, and that's it. And that's where it's dangerous. And at the dangerous meaning not only for your mental well-being, but for the global consciousness, and also in terms of advancing as a human. We can't remain in that same frame of mind and go into something and think to learn something new, because it's pointless, as you indicate.
Yeah, I was just reading chat right now, and Keith Bradley had posed a question, and he's asking if I'm looking for the truth or facts. As he mentions, as a Protestant, I don't believe in the religion tells us everything about the afterlife, devil in the details. I think truth and facts, I think, at this point right now, I think are the same thing to me. But as a Christian, my faith is telling me that the ghosts that I see in haunted locations are not actually the spirits of the deceased, that they are either angels or demons. That's what black and white in the book, it tells me that is not who I am speaking to, that it is either an angel or most likely it's a demon in the form of my deceased grandmother or whoever. And there is no earthly bound ghost. We either go to heaven or hell, or some staging area maybe. That's the belief that I have from my religion. But as a paranormal investigator, I know I am talking to deceased members, and so I'm believing that because I'm experiencing it. I know it to be true, and so then that is now then turning my focus back onto my religion and saying, well, you can't be true then. If you're telling me that what I am experiencing is not true, I have to now question your validity, meaning the Holy Book. So I don't know. I think that's the ultimate question for me right now, and I don't know if I'm ever going to find an answer, but I think it's healthy to have that ability to question things and to keep that open mind, and I'm lucky to actually have that. But for folks who already have a religious belief, would you think and are in the paranormal, would you categorize them as sort of rejecting their faith in order to confirm what they're believing?
I wouldn't say rejecting their faith. I would say expanding their spiritual base, because Anthony, I have the same question. I know of no theological foundation within Christianity that says that people are left one way or the other, and that we have to lead them to the light, that it's either an angel or a demon, and that's really cut and dry. Right. But upon reconsideration within the framework of Christianity, there are several times when God sends a spirit, and they never specify what type of spirit. For example, when King David, when he was about to take the throne over the nation of Israel, the king before him, it said God sent a troubling spirit, which means those ranks of angels and demons that we think of may be a little more fluid than we think. The book of Job, Satan isn't a proper name, as in the devil. Satan is a title meaning the accuser, almost like a courtroom. And so that's why it's good to be aware of other world religions, because if we look at, say, Tibetan Buddhism, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it talks about the bardos, and these are different states. When the spirit leaves the body, they can become trapped. If the spirit was, they get caught in these phases, like there's the hungry ghost realm, if they died and they had so much desire and so much unfinished business, they're stuck in this realm until they personally move through, I believe it's 7, don't quote me on that, they move through and they finally reach nirvana. And according to Tibetan Buddhism and the Dalai Lama, we can help them by reciting different prayers from the Tibetan Book of the Dead to help them kind of navigate the afterlife. The other thing, I think, is that, to go back to what I was saying before, if someone is a Christian and Jesus spoke with Moses and Elijah, who were dead, they came to comfort them, and we don't know exactly what they said, then why isn't it possible that we can do the same thing?
Right.
But we're taught, well, that's evil, don't touch tarot, don't touch the Ouija board, don't try to talk to the dead, that's just, that's demonic, it's evil. It's more of a scare tactic rather than an absolute, because if you're going to look within the holy books, you're going to find something different. And even the most staunch non-believers, such as Zen Buddhism, they're the most agnostic of quote-unquote religious systems, but yet they still believe in ghosts. They have a deep fear of ghosts, but they don't believe necessarily, I shouldn't say they don't believe, they don't know if there's a heaven or a hell or an afterlife, but they still have a belief in ghosts. So I think that, I understand where you're coming from, because I've questioned the same thing, but I've also personally, and I don't want to get too personal, but I have had a visitation at least once from a relative, and it was really tangible, and it's something that, I could talk myself blue in the face, and people either will believe it or they won't, but I know what I saw, felt, and heard. And so I have to trust what I know and then reconsider it, and not throw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater, but at the same time know what I know and try to make sense of it for myself. And I'm babbling. Done.
Or you're not.
Oh, you're
right,
not.
Thank you.
Well, you know what? One definition of religious experience stresses the importance of communion with either a divine being or a sense of oneness with nature and a wider reality. And Richard G. Swinburne, he was a British philosopher of religion. He proposed a 5-point classification system. Now, many of the points that Mr. Swinburne makes actually really can apply to the paranormal. Are you familiar with them at all?
I'm not. Please read.
Well, he talks about first the experience of God or ultimate reality meditated through a common public sensory object, like a feeling of union with a divine power when observing a sunrise. Then he talks about the experience of God through unusual, seeing the Virgin Mary in a cloud formation, or experiencing reality through private sensations that could be described, seeing God in a dream, or experiencing God, or feeling a distinct sense of presence. Then again, he talks about direct communion, actually making contact. I mean, all of those points, literally, you can put towards the paranormal.
I agree, Lucy, and it's good. In addition to religion, looking at philosophers is so helpful because you're getting, yet another perspective. And to add to that, what I want to say is, I think that some people are too afraid to think for themselves. And that's not our fault. We were ingrained that way. It's, we're no less important than Descartes or Plato or Aristotle or any other philosopher. They just happen to write it down and happen to pass it down. But we have the same capacity that they have. And I think that a lot of us, we kind of balk at that. And it makes me sad because I really think that what we experience is just as valid. We may not have the same words or the same classifications, but I think the example you gave, absolutely that applies to the paranormal. the exact same criteria of the stages that you mentioned. And it brings to mind, and I'm sorry for making this collegey, but Jack Mezirow. He's an educational theorist and philosopher, and he talks about something called transformational learning or transformative learning. And I try to teach it in some of my composition classes, and it talks about frames of reference, habits of mind, and reflexive thinking. And his basic premise is this: we all are born with a certain propensities. I mean, you might be maybe a little bit more fussy than your siblings or whatever. Then you have certain cultural things: church, teachers, political party, family, and that impacts your frames of reference. And so you're viewing the world through a pretty narrow lens that's been created by somebody else. In order to break free from that, you actually have to experience, either through tragedy or through your own assertion, you have to fracture that and see beyond to really understand what you know to be the truth. After you've experienced it, complete experiential experience, then you have to go back and renegotiate. Well, here's what I was raised with, here's what I was taught. And it may reaffirm what you were taught or parts of it. It may be different, but it's no worse. And I'll give you a really good example. For me, one very, very dear, beyond dear, very close relative, when I was a child, committed suicide unexpectedly. And under the very strict law of the Bible, he was in hell. And while the church was compassionate, some people, others said, it doesn't matter what people tell you, that person's in hell. And so what that did for me and for my family is we had to renegotiate what we were being told by these people, because it didn't seem just. And now we're finding out that, people that are, through science, our basic instinct is survival. Nobody in their right mind would self-destruct. And so because it's not something that they intentionally set out to do and destroy themselves and defy God, it was a psychological thing. It was a chemical breakdown that caused that. And so if God were to put them in hell, they live on earth for, say, 54 years, kill themselves, and then burn in hell for eternity, where's the justice? And that's when common sense kicks in. So we can take science, philosophy, paranormal phenomenon, experiential things that we know, and we have to kind of bring those together because, again, we're the most intelligent and the most informed, as you guys mentioned, with the Internet even, that helps us so much, group of people that have ever existed on this planet in history. And I think that we're all kind of getting to that point where we know better than to just accept it and cry and move on and say, well, they're in hell, pastor says so. We can say, well, that's bullshit, that's BS. I'm sorry, I cussed again.
It's okay.
I'm cussing on the air, talking about religion and swearing. But no, we really have to bring that all around. And I'm glad you guys are asking these, because I think that some people, they love the paranormal. It's interesting and it's a thrill, to get an EVP, to maybe make contact with a spirit. But I think it's a lot better for us human beings if we, like you guys, look at it in a broader context. What does this mean about my beliefs? What does this mean about me personally? What does this mean about my relationship with my family, my faith, whatever? I think that true and authentic paranormal investigation isn't something we've already made up our mind with every time. It is something that teaches us a new thing about ultimate reality every single time, rather than being some redundant process. And that's where I think the payoff comes from things that you guys do and what other authentic paranormal investigators do.
school. One thing that has struck me with the paranormal investigating, with the religious upbringing in Catholic, the stories of the apparition of the Blessed Mother and other apparitions, I've never experienced that. So I can only take what has been taught to me over and over on that side. But yet when it comes to the paranormal, I have experienced an apparition. I have experienced contact. Logically, in my mind, it is a lot easier to accept what I have experienced, and yet it leads me to kind of question what I've been taught.
And so how does it make you feel, Luci? I mean, do you feel like, well, it's all BS? Because what happens with a lot of us is we feel like it collapses the entire system, and I'm not sure what to do with that. That's something I'll probably question for the rest of my life, which I think is a good thing. But what does that do to you when that happens?
It doesn't. It leads me to question the religious teachings that I've been given. Not to discount them, but to pretty much look at them in a different light. It gives me a different perspective of what I've been taught, because I don't know for sure. These apparitions that have happened, maybe they have truly happened to someone. I have no proof of that. I only have what I've been taught. I can only compare that apparition of the Blessed Mother to the children at Fatima to my contact with the spirit here. It may not be on the same religious level, and someone who is deeply religious may say, no, they're completely different. But in my mind, they are kind of the same. You're experiencing something that is not of this world, that is not of your plane. So it's definitely an experience that I think, it just kind of leads me to believe that maybe these experiences that we're taught about are really more paranormal in nature.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, go ahead, Anthony.
No, I was just going to expand on that and maybe pose a question to anybody that wants to answer this. It sort of poses the question in my mind that you don't hear paranormal investigators talking about when they go into a location and, they see this white light or this white mist or whatever it is. There's never any, that I have heard of, never any religious interpretation. Nobody ever really says, I just saw the Holy Spirit, or I think I just saw Mary. None of the religion portion, compartments, whatever, comes into play when people are talking about their paranormal experiences. So, and that's what's always sort of perturbed me as far as why aren't people making that connection if they have that faith? Why aren't they including their religion? But then when Luci, when you were talking about how people are talking, have talked about and written about their experiences with Fatima, that maybe their religion shaped their interpretation of what they were seeing. And so if they believed heavily within whatever religion it is, that this manifestation that they're seeing could only be of their God or a representative of their God, and that's what they think it is. But is it really a religious apparition, or is it a spirit of something else?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a theory that the things that happened at Fatima were actually a UFO, the spinning of the sun.
Right.
The theory is that the description of the sun spinning could actually have been a UFO. So I do agree with you there. I think the teachings that people have, the religious beliefs that they have, really have it has defined what they have seen. And I think as far as now with paranormal investigators, they don't tend to really equate what they experience in a religious manner because they haven't been taught that.
Right, but the only thing that's brought up whenever paranormal investigators go somewhere, you see it and hear it time and time again, is, oh, that's evil, that's a demon. And, there's a reference to a religious connotation. So, but where is the Holy Spirit? Where's the good in those experiences? You never really hear it.
I got to jump in. You guys have brought up two very good points. One, absolutely. It was a shadow person. It was a dark entity. The negative, and that bothers me too, because personally I've had experiences that weren't that way, and I can't speak for you guys. And also, Luci, you were talking about, what makes, the miracle of Our Lady of Fatima or Lourdes or Guadalupe or any of those apparitions, what makes those valid? Well, for people, what makes it valid is the Catholic Church says, we approve, and they put their stamp on it, and then everyone accepts it. Which, again, most of us, we know what happens, and whether we get a crown and get a statue in the Vatican or at some shrine is kind of irrelevant, because I think that those of us that are receptive, we can see those types of things, and we know it, regardless of what other people believe, and there doesn't have to be all these steps to sainthood and beatification and things like that. Anthony, to your point about the good, and people, they'll, just like with the paranormal and paranormal people being considered kooks, the denomination I was raised in, Pentecostalism, people think of that as they're kooks and they're hysterics. And in fact, the charismatic movement, as it's called, that started over 100 years ago here in the U.S., people that were in what was my former denomination, they were actually poisoned to death. People said they were evil and they were putting strychnine in their wells. Families died. But I've been to meetings, and when I say meetings, it's not like going to Jim Jones meeting or a Charlie Manson meeting, but a basic church meeting. And I've talked to other people who've been that weren't raised in that, and they've described other things, but there's a palpable change in the atmosphere in that type of church environment, or there was. I'm noticing that currently it doesn't seem that way in churches. But I've literally seen a personal family friend. He had gangrenous legs. He had diabetes. He was pretty much close to death in a wheelchair. And there were no creepy televangelists with big teeth, big hair, lots of gold jewelry coming in and slapping him in the head. But when that palpable energy came into the room, the Holy Spirit that you talked about, I literally saw that man stand up on his gangrenous legs and actually dance around in a way that I can hardly describe. And after that was over, he didn't need the wheelchair. And I know people see faith healers and they see a lot of fraud, and there is. But I can tell you from personal experience, there are positive manifestations of spirit that are dismissed as laughable because of the parody. It's made it to a parody on TV by women in pink wigs like Jan Crouch, or kooks like Benny Hinn with his big swoopy hair and his Nehru jacket. But I can tell you, in rural Michigan, being in a church with 50 people and seeing somebody with gangrene actually walk again, or seeing somebody who, my cousin, who wasn't religious, and a baby, there's no psychosomatic effect there, a baby whose tongue was 3 times larger than a quote-unquote normal tongue, be prayed for, and by the time he got home, his tongue had shrunk down to the size of a normal person, and the doctors confirmed it. So I think that stuff is out there. It's just, if people want to see the positive, it is there. And I hope more paranormal investigators will look for that and not just try to find, those children with the black eyes, which I hope one never comes to my door because I will not answer. Or maybe I'll get excited and say, oh my God, a black-eyed child, and let them in. But But seriously, I think there is good out there that people can see that won't make national news, that won't be, coronated, blessed, and sealed by Rome. But I think that is there, and I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, but you guys have probably experienced that, and it's so precious to you that to talk about it almost feels like it would cheapen it.
Well, I have watched many faith healers, on television or, even for the research for the show, and then for just me personally, I have seen them online, and it's a powerful experience to watch, let alone probably be in that same room. And it's palpable, and you can feel it. And I know that exhilaration, and I know many people have felt that, even on a paranormal investigation, or you've heard stories of a father's child is underneath their car wheel, and they've lifted up that car to grab that child out. This inhuman strength that comes over someone is amazing, and you kind of question, how did that happen? But I have also been, to be honest, I've been listening to a lot of atheists and their debates and arguments for their stance and for what they believe in or what they don't believe in. That you never really hear about the stories of, or when people are praying for someone who has lost a limb, if they've lost their arm or lost their leg. There's not been one story where someone has regrown their arm or regrown their finger. I know you hear the stories about someone who's had cancer and they prayed and prayed and prayed, and maybe have gone to faith healers, and all of a sudden, their cancer is gone or something, or it's now in remission, or it's completely out of their body. There's no signs of anything at all anymore of whatever the illness was. Scientists will say that this, and the medical community will say, well, this happens. It's natural. Bodies will change, and cancer will go in remission or disappear or completely fade away, whatever it is. But where's the story of an arm being regrown or a leg being regrown after praying?
And that's a very good question. I saw Benny Hinn. Do you guys know who he is? He has the big flip hair.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. I went with my ex-fiance, my mom, and my brother in Detroit, Joe Louis Arena. It would have been 1996. We left at probably 3 a.m., got there at 4, waited for the doors to open at 7, and once the doors opened, everyone rushed in, and it was like the running of the bulls. We get in there, and it was the biggest fraudulent, disgusting display I've ever seen. When they took up the offering, it was with 5-gallon buckets. They took up the offering, and after they took the offering up, then all of a sudden he appeared on stage, very theatrical with the lighting and everything else, and he started saying that within 5 years, God was going to start restoring lost limbs. He said all these things that, God had told him. And it didn't jive with me. And again, it goes with trusting your gut and what you know. And then at the same time, he said, we're doing work in Africa, and they showed some moving, kind of emotionally raped type thing on the big Jumbotron in the Joe Louis Arena. And he said, we want a commitment today. We want cash. We want MasterCard, Visa. And amazingly, the people that were giving these big offerings were all of a sudden healed of things like, I had a kidney infection, I had, rheumatoid arthritis. Nothing that could really be verified. And it makes me sick that there's so much phoniness out there. Because in reality, even though miracles can happen in my experience and what I've seen and experienced myself, I think that it's turned into a circus by people that want to make money. And it kind of discourages anyone else's hope of something good happening. I lost my train of thought on that. But basically, the whole money thing, it was repulsive and disgusting. And there were more people that were turned away that were quadriplegics and had Lou Gehrig's disease. It was more heartbreaking than inspiring. And I hated myself for watching him all those years and thinking that it was going to be this phenomenal thing, and it wasn't. And I think it goes back to my earlier point that we're moving to a place where it's more about our experience and to not worry about what other people tell us to believe or what we should feel, but what we should know, and at the same, or what we do know. And at the same time, we do have to realize that we're not vampires. We're not going to live forever. And Buddhism, you embrace life. Good stuff happens and bad stuff happens, and it's just the state of being. I mean, we all die, we all get sick, and not everything is entitled to some sort of supernatural, phenomenal, big crash, boom, bang healing. Why some people get healed and some don't, I don't know. Some psychosomatic, I think, some's legit, but I can only go on what I know.
Okay, well,
that was a long answer, but
well, along those lines, talking about healing, you have a lot of people who are in the psychic world, who Reiki, the healing that they do. They say, well, I'm sending healing to you. I mean, isn't this along the same lines? I mean, do we really have proof, or do we know that the healing that these people say that they're doing, that it really exists? I mean, could this healing just be energy that we, like you say, a whole room of people pray for a sick child? Could it be the energy that everyone is gathering rather than a religious experience?
I think so, and I think that something that is repressed in our culture is that we're all divine. I mean, everything's energy, and I think that we can channel that energy. And it reminds me of a study by, I believe it was Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra, one or both of them. What they did is they assembled a group of about 12 to 20,000 people in an arena. A week before that, they had scientists randomly go out and take blood samples from willing participants within 20 miles of this arena. And what they measured were white blood cells. They measured serotonin, epinephrine, like depression-type things. They measured stress hormones. And then this group gathered and they prayed. It was, again, under 20,000 people. And then 2 weeks later, without these people knowing that this prayer happened, they went around to the same volunteers and they took blood samples. And what they found is that, and I wish I had the link for it for you guys. I can find it if you want. What they found is that there was an 80% increase in serotonin. There was an increase in serotonin in people's bloodstreams that decreased depression, of course. There was a 50% lower white blood cell count, which means whatever diseases people had affecting them had went down significantly or dissipated. And it wasn't conclusive, but it did, to me at least, it said something about the power of a group of people getting together and what that did. And if you think, and again, I'm sorry to be so Christocentric to listeners, and I don't mean to be off-putting. In the book of Acts, when Pentecost came and the Holy Spirit descended, before the Holy Spirit descended, it was a 9-day waiting period. And it said everybody was in one accord and in one mind. So you have all these people believing, hoping, praying, and wishing, whatever, for the same thing. And that's when that miracle sort of happened. So, Lucy, I think there's a lot of validity to that. It's about you getting with a group of people. And I've said before, it's almost like people that believe in that sort of thing or have the capacity to make that stuff happen. It's almost like bringing a bunch of Flintstones together, and it's a spark. Once they hit, they crack, and you get enough sparks going, there's going to be a change, whether people realize it or not, or want it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm getting way off topic with the paranormal, but I had to bring that Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra study in there because that's always stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think, I mean, as much as I would love to stay just on this topic alone for the rest of the show and probably more shows thereafter, I think, and this is my feeling and my interpretation of how religion could have been formed, and the idea that, in ancient times, people seeing things or experiencing things, just as what you were just talking about in Acts, that in order to either justify it or to understand it, their belief at that time, or the idea, is that there has to be something else creating it, because nothing happens for themselves. Nothing happens without man touching something or doing something or affecting something. And so if there is something that is unseen that is creating this, quote unquote, energy, that there must be something bigger, that there must be something higher or somebody above, and therefore the creation of this God was formed. There's a lot of documentaries that I even read about and watched that the universe and the astrological calendar and the way that the stars and the sun and the moon formed and swam across the sky literally translates to Jesus Christ. There's many people that say that there's a correlation between the sun, the actual hot sun in the sky, in the universe, to Jesus, and as being the Son of God, and God interpreted it as this universe, and how it sort of when it would go across the sky and go across the universe and land at different points on the horizons, came to the formation of the sun, quote unquote sun, died on the cross and 3 days later rose again, and that's the winter equinox, I believe that is. And so there's a lot of things that are sort of making sense. I'm not saying that they're truth, but I think I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of these people back then, where they had no education. There was no real education. There was no knowledge of really anything. They learned about things that they experienced themselves and they dealt with within their 20-mile radius. And so their interpretation of things is way different than what we feel and know to today. And I don't know if it is I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but the idea is that the interpretations that I'm having now of the Bible and of what it is telling me doesn't make sense. And what I'm finding in the paranormal and the things that I'm experiencing are making sense because, and I know my interpretation is very different than the next person, but there are things that I'm finding that is evident that, I can't convince anybody, but they're evident to me that are inexplainable and that can only lead to the idea that there is an afterlife. And now, on the other hand, I've got this religion that's telling me that there is not. And so as I'm questioning things, I'm sort of moving away from that religion portion of it and focusing on the paranormal. And I think it's a good thing, and I don't want people to start to sort of bash me and say that I'm a religious basher, which I'm not. It's just a matter of being more open-minded and, for myself, trying to understand what that is. And I think the paranormal has, I guess it's enticed me when I was younger because I've always questioned things. And I think having that mindset is healthy.
I would agree. And if maybe if you want to have me back, sorry for the shameful plug or shameless plug, Freudian slip there. Around Christmas time, I would be happy to come back and talk about my actual belief in astrology based on the birth of Christ and what science has now proven, because of all of the events that happened, and with what we thought were three wise men, which were actually at least 16. All the different signs that happened in the sky that really kind of renewed my faith in astrology. But again, I don't know what that has to do with what you said, but I had to plug that in there.
No, I'd love to. I mean, that really intrigues me. I love that topic, and I love trying to make sense of it, whether it's truth or not. Trying to explore it and see where it goes is another possibility to either explain religion or explain the paranormal side of things.
I think that religion, science, and the paranormal, if you really want to know if something's true, they validate each other. There's a validation across the board where it can't be denied. And I'll give one example. There is a professor from University of Pennsylvania, I believe, or Penn State. His name is not Kenham. Okay. He's actually from University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Andrew Newberg. He is Jewish. He is not Christian. He has been studying the phenomenon of speaking in tongues for several years. And he's done tens of thousands of CAT scans and MRIs on people that are speaking in tongues. And I was raised in that faith, and people, in my linguistic studies, they say it's just babbling, it means nothing. But I felt it was something different. Well, what this person, and again, he has no horse in this race, he's being an observer. He did all those MRIs and CAT scans, and the interesting thing that he found is that while people were, quote-unquote, speaking in tongues, the part of the brain that activates language and imagination shuts down. And you can look him up on YouTube and see excerpts of his studies. What he found is that when they're speaking in tongues, that there's no reason that their tongue, throat, or mouth should even be moving, that it's something that's not in the brain, but something else, because it completely shuts down any language type of language recognition or even attempt to speak, which I found extremely exciting and scary at the same time because I wasn't sure myself. But again, back to what I was saying, science, I think, can validate things. And when people get nervous about science and say, well, I believe the Bible. No, science should be able to prove paranormal or supernatural or whatever you want to call it, phenomena. And even if it doesn't immediately, eventually I think it does. And that's a good thing. And so hopefully scientists will continue to work with the paranormal community to bring more validity to the things that we do and that we study and that we know, just so other people can say, well, I mean, you can't deny this. I mean, it's a peer-reviewed study that's been published in the American Journal of Medicine. How can you refute that? That's one example.
Okay, Noah, the question that comes to me, speaking in tongues, it's someone who is obviously speaking in a language that they don't know. This is something that happens when someone is involved in possession, where someone could be all of a sudden speaking Latin and they don't know that language. What is the difference? Aren't they one and the same?
That's a very good question. Billy Graham, he, being, the good Christian he said that speaking in tongues was demonic. The difference that I've noticed is that when somebody is possessed, they speak in a language that's recognized by humans, Latin or Portuguese or some other language that we've been able to validate. Whereas when people speak in what's called the tongues of angels, there are speech parts which are called phonemes and morphemes that are put together that they have the same formation as language, but nothing that can be interpreted under any current linguistic patterns that we know. So it is a language, but not one that we know. Whereas demonic possession, it's more of a show of power that they're able to speak through somebody in a knowable language. Because if it's demonic, it can't speak like an angel, whereas when somebody's speaking in tongues, they're speaking in a way that's not recognizable to humans. There's no direct interpretation. It's between that person and divinity. But that's a very good question, because that's something that comes up all the time. And I'm trying to get people to believe that that's necessarily true. But from my own experience, somebody who, didn't fake it, I mean, that's something that has happened to me and continues to, and I don't doubt it. And so it's a prayer language that there's a lot of biblical references that support that. But I understand the confusion when I see demonic possessions where they say they spoke in tongues. That's a very it's a broad term and actually a mislabeling of what happened.
Let me just change gears just a little bit. And because you are so humble, let me list your awesome books from Amazon. There's Exorcist Rising, Visitation, Soothsayer, the KU Handbook for Writers, 1st and 2nd edition, and Miss American Pie and Other Lies, just to name a few. So, Mr. Tysick, are we in waiting for another great masterpiece coming soon?
I am humbled and a little bit embarrassed, and I'm grateful too that you mentioned those. I have a few things I've been cooking up for a few years. I would just say keep watching, because I do have some stuff that I'm working on. One of them, one manuscript I have, it has to do with the Divine Feminine, with the Virgin Mary and other interpretations throughout the world, like Kali in Hinduism, Guan Yin in Buddhism. So I'm always cooking up something. Thank you so much for bringing those up. I appreciate that. That's very kind. Thank you.
Well, what are you teaching now?
I am teaching Lamaze classes. I am teaching the Heimlich maneuver and also twerking. I'm sorry.
So,
there was a video coming out.
No, actually, I'm teaching writing, composition, and several types of composition, and I'm also teaching literature this fall. And I'm moving away from voodoo and the dark stuff and moving into the Eastern religions, focusing heavily on Hinduism and Buddhism, hopefully to elevate people rather than give them the willies when they leave my class. So hopefully it'll be a good change of pace.
Well, we cannot thank you enough for coming on the show tonight. And I know we only touched the surface on this topic, but I feel some of your intellect has rubbed off on us, and hopefully we can all continue this discussion in our own cities and towns. Is there any website or link that you want to share with everyone so they can keep in touch with you or maybe reach out to you for more answers or help?
If people would like to speak with me, they can directly email me at ntysick@gmail.com. N-T like Tom, Y-S like Sam, I-C like Charlie, K @gmail.com. be happy to speak with anyone. My website currently is defunct, and I haven't worked on it, but I'm always happy to speak with people. And I thank you guys so much. You're always so gracious and so nice, and it's always my pleasure to be on here. And it's a pleasure to speak with like-minded people. And I hope that the listeners enjoyed the show tonight.
Well, thank you, Noah. You know, every time you're on the show, we never have enough time. I think we have to extend our shows whenever we have you.
Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate it, and I thank you again.
Thank you, Noah, so much. And if everybody wants to check them out, go to Amazon.com. All you actually have to do is just Google Noah Tysick, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes up, and you'll be able to go to Amazon.com and order his books. So thank you again, Noah. Have a great weekend.
You guys
Thank you, Noah.
Have a good night, Luci and Anthony. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Seriously, because, you know, we have to extend these shows whenever Noah's on, and especially when we talk about religion and paranormal, because there's so many things and so many roads that we can go into that, I mean, you just need one question and you can talk for 2 hours.
No, I mean, every time he's on, to me, it's mind-blowing because there's so many other questions. We start off with certain questions, and then it's like there's so many more that come up. And to me, it's a learning experience every single time, and it's always a pleasure to talk to him.
Yeah, I mean, we had a great chat room. We had K.O., Keith Bradley, Mama J, Nell Crawford, Sharon Swift, and, of course, the Red Phantom is there, and a whole bunch of guests that have been in the chat all night long talking about the topics tonight. I hope, you know, like I said in the beginning, our show is not to convince or to sway anybody or even to brainwash anybody into thinking the way that Luci or I think or the way that our guest thinks. We only do this show to spark some interest in it or to possibly open up your mind maybe just a little smidgen and think about things that you may not have thought about before or that you may not have agreed on before that maybe you'll do a little bit more research on, because everywhere you look, everywhere that you turn, if you do it on your own and on your own will, that's more truth for yourself. Don't believe everything that is spoon-fed to you, either by the closest people around you or from the farthest people that you can possibly get on the Internet. Believe what you find out. Believe in the research that you do and the experiences that you have, because like Luci always says, you know, your truth is your experience, and that's the only way that you are ever going to find the answers that you're looking for.
The whole thing is that even if, you know, like Anthony said, it's not to change your belief, it's just to get you to maybe talk about it. There's so many things that we come in contact with and we read and we learn, but discussion is how you find different perspectives. It's how you find different answers, and it doesn't necessarily change what you believe, but it gives you a little bit more. What I believe, what Anthony believes, what Noah believes. Unless we have that conversation, everyone is stuck in their own little room, and they have this belief. Well, by learning what someone else thinks, just kind of expands your mind a little bit, and we're hoping that's what our shows do.
I think that's it.
That's it. I mean, you can't add anything else to it.
I can't say any more to it, but loved having you guys listening to us tonight. Noah was absolutely amazing. He always blows my mind, and as you were saying, Luci, I hope some of his intellect rubbed off on me. I can only wish for that, but this is an interesting topic, and it's been, personally, for me, an interesting topic to discuss. And whether you've been thinking about religion and the paranormal and the combination of the two, or if maybe tonight's discussion sort of sparked the idea, hey, you know what? You know, I've never really thought of that. And here I am in the paranormal, and what does my religion say about it? What am I doing that may be of a conflict with my religion? Should I even be in this field of paranormal if my religion is telling me otherwise? I think maybe this will start to sort of reposition your thoughts and what you believe in and what you know to be true. Maybe this will reposition you to think things differently, or maybe it'll just be a complete circle and it confirms you and brings you right back to where you were. It's not meant to validate. This show is not meant to validate our opinions. It's meant to validate your own interpretations and your own experiences and your own opinions, because that's what matters. My thoughts and feelings on things should not matter. It's what you guys think out there that matters. So believe what it is that you believe in, but believe in it wholeheartedly and believe it to be true. If you have a question, question it, but move on. Don't live with that question. Find the answer on your own, and then turn your life. You may find something different.
I just want everyone to start discussion. Talk about it. Don't repress what you believe simply because you don't think someone else is going to agree. Talking about things is healthy. And by opening up and by discussing what you believe, you're probably going to find someone else who has the same beliefs. You're also going to find someone who doesn't, who disagrees with you. But what better way to learn about something than to talk to someone that has an opposing view?
All right, so why don't we get to highlighting our Fan of the Week?
Okay. This week, the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, we actually went to YouTube. All of our videos, we upload them, all of our shows we upload to YouTube. And we get a lot of comments on them. Some of them are kind of negative, and then some of them are really, really good. And what we wanted to do this week was to acknowledge one of the fans on YouTube who left us a really great comment. Now, they don't have a whole bunch of information, and a lot of times they don't really have a picture. But this week, our Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week is Bill Quagg. And he left a comment this week on one of our videos, and it goes, I follow your broadcasts on YouTube. You both do a good job, and the shows are fun to listen to while I plow through my boring legal work. Well done. Thank you so much, Bill, for listening to us. Thank you so much for enjoying the show. And you know what? YouTube has just opened up so many more people, listening to our show, and we're really, really grateful. So thank you, Bill. Thank you for being a fan, and thank you for your wonderful words.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Bill. And don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, just like us on Facebook or subscribe to us on YouTube, Paranormal Review Radio. Well, the relationship between religion and the paranormal has no defined lines. The relationship is different to everyone based on their own experiences and beliefs. Will we ever find the true connection between the two? Maybe not in this lifetime, but will the answer come from the church, or will the answer be found in the hearts of the faithful or in that of the skeptic? We want to thank Noah Tysick for another evening of thought-provoking and informative conversation. It was a real pleasure. Now, if you've seen the news lately, one would think that evil is winning here on Earth. Shootings, rape, violence, murders, it's happening all across the U.S. and the world. The new movie, Deliver Us from Evil, is based on the experiences of 16-year veteran of the New York Police Department, Ralph Sarchie, while he was working out of the 46th Precinct in New York's South Bronx. While investigating incredibly evil crimes with no explanation or solution, Ralph actually became a demonologist. Ralph wrote about his experiences in his frightening book, Beware the Night. He will be here next Friday night to talk about what he calls the work, his book, and the link between true crime realities of life and the world of the supernatural. Just what did he come face-to-face with? Join us next Friday night
and find out. We want to thank everyone for spending another Friday night with us. You know, you guys make us feel so special. Thank you, Anthony, for another great show. So, until next week, Parapeeps, always protect yourself and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal